Okay. Okay, it's going.
All right.
Okay, so I'm Chelsea Chalk.
I'm Susan Bies.
I'm Whitley Hunsaker.
And I'm Rachel Rasmussen.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump right in and start with the advocate one who is against the same-sex marriage. The first question was, what principles of effective speech did you see in his speech? Does anyone want to start who felt like they had a good answer to that question?
I will.
Okay, go ahead.
Honestly, I kind of had a hard time with this because it was so religious based that it kind of threw me for a loop. But I tried to pick out a few good things about just his speaking in general. He seemed pretty confident. He had fairly good eye contact. He had a little bit of movement. It wasn't like the great movement, but he had a little movement, which means he wasn't all stiff. And he had a pretty strong voice.
Yeah, I
Those were
agree.
the main things I picked out as far as his speaking ability.
Yeah, I totally agree. Anybody else have comments on that?
I think she did a good job of finding the silver lining in that speech because I couldn't find anything at all that was effective for me anyway.
Yeah, same. I had a hard time with that one.
I
Go
think
ahead.
it was stretching it a little bit to find those things, but I had to give him a little credit. You know, it takes courage to get up and stand for something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Okay, so the second question is, what was the basis or the premise for his stance? I can go ahead and answer this one. He was just saying that God was not accepting of gay marriage and homosexuality, and that it goes against what God has said, and that they would be punished. I felt like he really emphasized those points, that they would be punished for the sin. I don't really know what else to say other than that, but I feel like that summed it up.
I was going to say that he used the scriptures really and God's law as his foundation, and quotes a lot of scriptures. And so, well, we know that from what we've learned and how it sounds that using that tone of speech really just diminishes the validity of your argument. And it also, I noticed, and even in one sentence in there, because of the scripture that he read, he sounded like homosexuals really just deserve death as a punishment, which is,
Yeah.
anyway, probably didn't go over too well with the general public, but I don't think it would be taken very seriously.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, if you were on the fence when it comes to same-sex marriage, how would you feel after listening to his speech?
I can answer this one.
Okay.
I like what you guys have all said, and that's basically my same feelings. But I don't want this to sound bad, but just because of his vibe and like his harshness, I guess you could say, I feel like I kind of felt myself go more towards like, how do I say this? Like not pro-gay in a way, but like I wanted to like my heart just gay marriage or anything like that, but it really made me feel bad that he was so cruel in a way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like if I were someone listening to that where I like didn't have an opinion, and then I listened to him, I would totally be pro-gay marriage because he like made me angry almost. Well, I think even more so because like I have a great knowledge of like the Lord's gospel, and I know that he like wasn't representing it accurately, and I think that frustrated me. But yeah, I agree with you, Whitley. I understand.
That's what I was trying to say, but you said it way better.
I agree too. In my comments on it, I said if I were a person who didn't believe in God, my thinking after listening to his speech would be he's just trying to preach, and I'd be thinking, well, God's word isn't for everyone. What about those people who don't believe in God? This doesn't apply to them. You know?
Yeah.
And yeah, he was trying to scare people into it, which is like really not what God wants.
Yeah. Overall, I think it wasn't really persuasive. It sounded more like he was trying to warn people and, like you said, scare them. He wasn't trying to persuade people as to why gay marriage isn't a good idea. He was just trying to say, well, this is what God says. I'm trying to scare you. You should believe me because you don't want to die or whatever. It was very, very negative. A very negative vibe, as Whitley said.
Yeah. Any other comments on Advocate 1 before we jump on to Advocate 2?
Ooh, one quick thing.
Okay.
I also didn't like that he didn't really have any other resources besides the Bible. That was his only resource. He didn't have any secular resources. He didn't have any personal experience.
Yeah.
And he didn't follow the recommended sequence of narrative persuasion of self, us, and now. A story of self, story of us, story of now. He didn't follow that at all. And so it was just kind of very ineffective as far as persuasion goes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so let's move on to Advocate 2. He was obviously pro-gay marriage or same-sex marriage. So what principles of effective speech did you see in his speech, or effective speaking did you see in his speech?
I thought it made it seem like a normal family. You know, he was super accomplished and an Eagle Scout, and you know, going to college and doing all the things that a successful young man would do. So I thought it was really quite persuasive about the commitment of, you know, just love and the rights of everyone to be able to love and marry whoever they want. So I thought it was a very persuasive speech.
Yeah.
Even though I don't, you know, obviously agree with the content, but
I feel like he was very good at like proving wrong most of like the advocates against gay marriage's like main point in their arguments is usually talking about the inability to raise children, and I feel like he really kind of got them at that one. I was kind of like, oh, how could I like argue what he was saying, you know? Because he made like good points. I mean, he didn't change my mind, but it was interesting.
Yeah. Did anyone else pick out that he followed the sequence? You know, the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. Did anyone else notice that?
Yeah.
I mean, that right there. He was confident. He had a really strong voice. He had great eye contact. He used gestures, movement. His opening was very catchy. He didn't stumble on any of his words, and he knew exactly what he wanted to say. I didn't notice him using any notes or paper or anything. I mean, this guy was the perfect example of what persuasive speaking should be. And even though I don't agree with gay marriage, you know, because of my personal beliefs, his argument is very sound.
Yeah.
Just from a persuasive perspective.
Yeah.
And I also want to add that, like, I guess from the first to the second, the first one kind of, his vibe was more like wanted to prove wrong and kind of had like hatred, I guess, in his persuasiveness, versus the other one was more of not necessarily trying to prove wrong. I didn't feel that vibe, but more of like love and like freedom. And I think that's why it seemed more persuasive, because we as humans are more prone to, I guess, it kind of is compared to like, you know, the words that are pleasing to God versus pleasing to men. I guess just as humans we're more drawn to the softer, more loving, more, does that make sense? Like the rights of people? I don't know.
Yeah.
Love is a very strong motivator. I'm reminded of one of my classmates in Pathways program. He one of his persuasive essays or something like that was on why love is the best motivator, even above fear. And that's what you just said reminded me of that, because the first guy was trying to use fear, whereas the second guy was using love, and love is a very strong motivator. People don't want to do something because they're afraid. So when you use love, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's honestly exactly what I'm trying to say. You guys are just saying everything better than I am, but that's what I mean to say. The love is way better than the fear.
Yeah, I agree.
I also thought it was interesting, just really quick. He personalizes the argument, and then we've learned about framing, like saying something that might be negative in a more positive way. So instead of saying same-sex marriage, he uses the phrase like you marry the person that you love, and so it all seemed a lot more positive. So anyway,
Yeah.
we can move on.
Okay, so the next question is, what was the basis and or the premise for his stance?
Personal experience, I'd say.
Yeah, basically he was just trying to prove that a gay couple can be just as good of parents as a heterosexual couple.
Yep.
Yeah. Any comments? Should I move on?
Couple things.
Okay.
Like next article or next question?
Next question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, then go ahead.
Okay. So the next question was, if you were on the fence when it comes to a same-sex marriage, how would you feel after listening to his speech?
If I had no religious motivation, I would totally agree with him. At least a little bit. I mean, he would. His speech could easily motivate me to think that his perspective is more valid just by how good he was. I mean, of course, my religious beliefs prevent that, but if those were not in the picture, he could be very persuasive.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree with everything she just said, too.
Okay.
I don't really have anything else to add.
Yeah, me neither. Okay, so what was less effective about his speech?
I couldn't find anything.
The only thing that I felt like was that it was a little bit scripted to me, like he had, I mean, which is fine, but it seems like he was a little bit like unnatural because I don't know, that's like the only thing I could really find, but I kind of searched for that one.
Yeah, I think he did a really good job.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think the only thing that stood out to me, I don't remember who just brought it up, maybe it was Rachel, but talking about like how gay parents are like just as qualified in a way as like heterosexual parents, but I guess in my mind I just thought like that's not what the problem is. I'm not thinking that they're going to be like a more or less effective parent, or they can't raise the child just as good as, you know what I mean, like a heterosexual couple. So that part, I guess, to me, just because of my knowledge, it seemed invalid, because in my mind that's not what the issue is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and like research actually, I've talked to like some professors on campus, and like research actually shows that like homosexual parents usually aren't any different than, I mean, in just like a non-religious standpoint, obviously, but they usually turn out to be just the same, because usually like homosexual couples, one parent or like one person takes on the more feminine role and one person takes on the more masculine role, and because of that they usually fulfill both roles to like a necessary extent parenting wise. But anyway, you guys ready to move on to the next article? Any other comments? Okay. So the blog article by Matt Walsh. The first question, what principles of effective writing did you see in his article?
Go ahead.
Anyone? I just felt like a lot of his arguments were really well articulated and really sound, and I felt like he said them really well, even though I didn't really see any references really, but I just felt like the way he said them made a lot of sense. I didn't. Anyway, anyone else?
Okay, I'll bite.
Okay.
He had a catchy opening. His first line was an interesting way to open it, but it was catchy, enough to pique your interest.
Yeah.
He was overall pretty effective. He acknowledged the opposition as well as what people would probably say in response to his stance. I mean, he laid out how people were probably going to respond regardless of what he argued in his explanation. And I thought that right there was pretty effective.
Yeah.
And, he presents his arguments in a logical order that makes sense. And the information he shares appears to be sound. It would have been nice if he had given references for some of the stuff he referred to, but some of it is kind of common knowledge. And, this article, the way he presented his arguments, I was reminded of a movie I used to watch, and not anymore because it's got a lot of bad language in it. But in this movie, they have I don't even know what they're called. I think they're rap wars, but you have like a certain amount of time and you get up and you do a on the spot rap or whatever it is, and you're battling someone else, and the other person gets a turn, and then whoever the crowd likes best is the winner, moves on to the next round. Anyway, in this movie, this one kid ends up going up against an enemy or whatever, someone that, these two just don't like each other. And this enemy of his knows every bad thing that's happened to this kid. And this kid is told ahead of time that the other guy is going to use all those bad things against him. So what happens is this kid gets to go first. And so not only does he lay out every bad thing that has happened to him, and he says, I'm still here, I'm still standing, but then he turns around and he points out what the other guy is all about. And in the end, the other guy has nothing to say because everything he was going to say has already been said.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of that because in Persuasion, when you say everything that can be said about the issue, there's nothing left for the other side to argue about. There's nothing left for them to try to prove you wrong about.
Yeah, that was a really good tactic that he used in his article. Okay, so the next question is, what was the basis and or the premise for his stance?
I think the part that stood out to me was just like maybe it's just that it's on my mind, the reason I think of it, but what came to mind was like the redefinition of marriage, or like the redefinition of family, and how he talked about like the traditional ways versus like the now, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that he brought up like Christianity. I don't know if that makes it invalid or not, like if you're Christian and stuff like that, but how he talked about like loving whoever you want. It doesn't impose a definition like to the states and things like that. I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. I guess because it's been on my mind, but
yeah.
I was thinking, it's a lot of it was about why marriage between a man and a woman is different from homosexual relationships. He does a really good job of pointing that out. Mm-hmm. And I thought it made sense to me. It put it in a light I had never considered before. I mean, I've always known that the relationship between a man and a woman are different, but the way he described it with all those different reasons it was different made it clearer for me, and I'm someone who believes that it's different to begin with.
Yeah, I really liked how he talked about like kind of like what you were just saying, Rachel, but how he was saying that it is different because they can create humans, they can create life, and no other relationship can do that. And I feel like that's such a good point. And I don't know, like my husband and I were talking about this the other day, and like just exactly about that, about the fact that like biologically, like only a man and only a woman can create a child together. And like there is a reason that biologically it's that way and naturally it is that way. And like we were thinking about how like without heterosexual couples the world cannot continue.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, but like the world can continue without homosexual couples, but they cannot continue without, you know, a man and a woman creating life.
That was the thing that I thought too, Chelsea. And it reminded me of this one phrase that he talked about where he's trying to say that the laws want to make, you know, heterosexual and same-sex marriage equal, but equal really means the same. And by definition, you know, the procreative powers that make a heterosexual relationship so much more valid, it makes it impossible for them to be equal because they're not the same type of relationship. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Anyway, that goes along with what you were just talking about, you know, and I think that that's a really important part of his argument.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments before we move on to the next question? Okay. If you were on the fence when it comes to same-sex marriage, how would you feel after reading this article?
I don't think, by reading this, I don't think I would really have changed if I already had, I don't know. I think he does a good job at proposing or arguing his point, but at the same time, I think if I would already have my opinion, or let's say that I was lesbian, I don't think that this would have changed my mind at all, but I think he makes valid points, but and like I brought up the Christianity thing, and I just think that he needs to pay attention more to who he's writing to, because if I wasn't Christian or if I didn't know anything about Christ, that statement would be completely invalid, and I think that I would like kind of challenge his credibility as to how he's arguing, if that makes sense. So I feel like his I don't know, the article didn't really do much for me because I just didn't think that it was that credible, if that makes sense.
I also think that there was a kind of a sarcastic and angry overtones to his remarks. He said something about the exalted ones. I mean, he's very dramatic and condescending in a lot of ways.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I kind of noticed that too. He kind of had a kind of annoyed / dramatic flair to it.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you, Whitley. Like, usually when people are well, I mean, I guess the question is, like, if you're on the fence, but,
Right.
I mean, if I were, you know, pro-gay marriage, that probably, I mean, it definitely wouldn't have changed my mind at all, or even really made me consider the other side. But I think he did make a lot of, like, good points to, like, help us understand, you know, more why heterosexual marriage makes sense. But I agree, it didn't do a lot for me either.
I mean, I think his points on why marriage between a man and a woman is different than heterosexual relationships, and I think as far as respecting the definition of marriage as between a man and a woman and not changing it, I think he makes a strong argument for that. But I think that's his strongest argument.
Yeah, I agree.
Everything else is just kind of...
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a word, but it's just...
Yeah. Anything else for the next question? No? Okay. What was less effective about his article? I feel like we kind of talked about this a little bit already, but anybody else have anything to add? What we said?
I mean, aside from not offering any sources for his information, regardless of how commonly known it is, he doesn't really seem to follow the self, us, now order that's suggested for persuasion. I mean, I guess you could probably find it if you dug a little deep, but it would be very subtle if it's there. But I didn't see it, and I think he could have been more persuasive if he had put more of that order into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and again, I just want to point out the Christianity part. It just kind of shocked me that he kind of, like what Susan said, kind of the sarcastic tone. But the way he brought up, like, well, hello, that's the whole reason Christ exists for families. That's truth to us, you know, because we are Christian or whatever. But I just felt like that, I don't know, it just made me doubt him more because he's not paying attention to who his audience is, if that makes sense.
It was
Made him
random.
less credible, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a random addition at the end, it seemed.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing just says, what questions do you still have? So does anyone have any questions or anything before we end?
I don't have any.
Me neither.
I don't either. Okay. Was that at least 20 minutes? I'm pretty sure it was.
I think so.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks guys. And I hope you have a good night.
Thanks, ladies.
Oh, got it in the broadcast.
Yeah, I'm going to stop it right now.
Oh.
Okay.